Welcome to the Summercast, a podcast aimed at making fundamentalism great again by applying confessional Baptist doctrine to all of life.
Welcome, guys, to the YouTube channel. Thanks for dropping in. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. If you like the topic, if you like the conversation, if you like the discussion, please hit the thumbs up. If you don't, hit the thumbs down and let me know why. We'll engage in the comment section below as I have time. Anyways, I want to talk about a couple different things today, and what I didn't do was I was going to bring in my browser source, but then I didn't. So let me see if I can't fix that here. Go ahead and bring it in so that we can have it for later. This isn't going to be the first thing we talk about, but nevertheless. Actually, we can just change this one. Yeah, it'll work. Let's see. Okay, you know what? We're just not even going to go. Let's not worry about that. Okay. What I wanted to start talking about this evening was this caricature, this constant, it's a talking point, constant parrot, that if you speak against anything that has to do with a contrary biblical sexual ethic. So if you speak against transgenderism, or if you speak against the LGBT community as a whole, and not, I'm not saying against people in the sense that you're inciting hatred against them, but you're speaking out against the principles that their movement is founded on, namely a sinful, destructive sexual ethic, and the habit of those who would find themselves in that community, find themselves to be supporters of that community, is to label anyone who talks about that community in any kind of a negative way, anyone who addresses the sins of that community in any kind of way, to be hateful. It's a hate crime to speak against trans lives or those who are homosexuals or part of the LGBTQ group community. And one thing I wanted to show you guys to illustrate my point, I put a post up on Facebook the other day, and it was a post referring back to something that actually happened back in October 14th, I believe. I don't know if that's the day it happened or just the day it was posted on. But the Kansas City Atheist Coalition, which I've had interactions with in the past, posted pictures in October with a group of them, a very small group of them, outside Red Bridge Baptist Church in Overland Park, I think it is, and they're protesting supposedly a hateful conference that was happening at the time. And it says they're protesting homophobia and transphobia at Red Bridge Baptist Church. This was in October, first half October. And so I know what the event was. The event actually had one of my professors speaking at that event from Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, who, let's see here, who is very much so rather prolific in the area of biblical sexual ethics, biblical manhood and womanhood. And what the event was, it was a short conference. I believe it was only one day, and it was basically just, a couple speakers, and it was called Gender and Sexuality Issues. And Dr. Owen Strahan and was it Doug Ritchie they were speaking on gender and sexuality issues. And I'll just kind of read an excerpt from the event Facebook posting from Red Bridge, and it says, "Unlocking Biblical Truth: Gender and Sexuality Issues." That's the title of the conference. It's sponsored by Christian Life Commission of the Missouri Baptist Convention, hosted by RBBC. This one-night event will equip Christians to know biblical truth and about manhood, womanhood, and our God-given identity. Dr. Owen Strahan will speak about how Genesis 1 through 2 shape our understanding of the human person and how we can help people confused by our secular gender revolution. State Representative and area pastor Doug Ritchie will issue a call to faithfulness in the public square on matters of gender and sexuality. I don't hear a bunch of hate-fueled language there. But nevertheless, it's called hate, and I will bring up an illustration. This is a picture, and I'm posting this picture on this video, or showing you this picture on this video. It's going to show the man's face because it's already been made public. It's already been made public on the KCAC, the Kansas City Atheist Coalition Facebook page, and so I don't think there's any problems with just showing you everything. And here it is. Here it is. Get a load of the sign. Get a load of the sign. You can't change who you love, but you can change who you hate. You can change who you hate. Now, who was it? Somebody on my Facebook page commented on that and said something to the effect, asked the question, what if you love to hate people? And he's exactly right. What if you love to hate people? So you can't change who you love, right? I think that's an excellent point. Two of the things that I mentioned in my post proper, it was, number one, if a person, their campaign, and this is how it's always been, this is how it's always going to be, their campaign shoots human rights in the foot. Okay, so they come forward, saying, you guys at the KCAC and elsewhere come forward saying, we stand for human rights. Human rights. I believe that's even the language used in the Facebook post. I mean, that's why it's wrong to speak against these issues. Here's the thing. If a person is seeking therapy or biblical counseling, and they've become convicted per se of their homosexuality, and they want to fight same-sex attraction or sexual temptation or whatever, and they opt for biblical counseling or some kind of therapeutic process, to take that right away from them is to actually take away their right to pursue happiness, isn't it? Because if a person wants to fight those kinds of temptations, if a person wants to not fall to the sin of same-sex attraction and homosexuality and all the whirlwind of confusion in the LGBT community, then they would be happy, right, to receive some kind of counseling having to do with just that. And one of the things the Kansas City Atheist Coalition has wanted to do is to actually make, they call it something like kind of some therapy. They give some name to it, some kind of therapy. But really, they want to make biblical counseling on homosexuality, orthodox biblical counseling on homosexuality for those struggling with homosexual temptation. They want to make something like that illegal. Deconversion therapy, that's what they call it. Deconversion therapy. They want to make deconversion therapy illegal. And that's just to bar people from their right to seek it. Right? The thing about the church is the church isn't like making people, they're not forcing people to undergo deconversion therapy. They're not forcing people to do that. Okay, so the church is not. And the problem is, however, is that Kansas City Atheist Coalition, even though the church is not doing that, they have no problem making a person abstain from deconversion therapy. So the pot is calling the kettle black, really, right? Because the whole idea is like we need to make deconversion therapy illegal. Well, what if someone wants to undergo deconversion therapy? Well, then you're preventing their pursuit of happiness, are you not? The other thing is, the sign, kind of responding more directly to the sign, you can't change who you love. Right, so this guy holding this sign anyone he says he loves, anyone who feels loved by him, are loved by him, and he loves others precisely because he is forced by a necessity of nature to love others, right? There's no genuine voluntarism in this. There's no voluntary decision to love your family members. There's no voluntary decision to enter into a marriage. There's no voluntary decision to love a friend, right, and give your life up for them. You're just made to do it. You can't help it because of a necessity of nature. In other words, just as the sun must shine in order to be the sun, so too the homosexual must love other people of the same sex. They're forced by necessity of nature, which it cheapens love. It cheapens love. It makes it not a matter of the heart, not a matter of a person's heart and will being poured out for another person. It makes it a necessity of nature. In other words, because you're born this way, you'll love these certain people. Well, that's sad. That's sad. And then one of the biggest problems with the sign is that, nobody's preaching hate. Nobody's preaching hate. In fact, the stated purpose of the conference, atheists typically slander Christian organizations and churches that try to do things and speak to these issues. And they slander them by way of casting all of their kind of efforts to minister to homosexual people, the homosexual community. They cast all that as hate. Well, the stated purpose of the conference was to help people. We'll go back to the first paragraph. Here's like the second sentence. Dr. Owen Strahan will speak about how Genesis 1 through 2 shape our understanding of the human person and how we can help people confused by our secular gender revolution. Okay? Now, is it hateful to think that someone's confused? Well, if it's hateful to think someone's confused, then atheists are hateful because they think Christians are confused, right, about the existence of God, among other things. So it can't be the fact that Redbridge Baptist Church thinks there's confused people out there. It has to be the fact that they're offering help to people who they see, who they believe to be confused. In other words, they want to show someone the truth. And basically the atheists are saying, you can't do that. Sorry, if you believe it's true, it's not true. We've already settled the issue. We don't even want to discuss it really. We don't have good arguments. And it doesn't matter what you think is true in the final analysis. This isn't open to dialogue for them. Atheists are the most dogmatic most dogmatic segment in philosophical and religious circles. Most dogmatic segment. Okay, so anyways, that's kind of something I wanted to touch on. That's the Kansas City Atheist Coalition. I have debated men from their ranks twice. One one-on-one, the other time, the latter instance was 2-on-2. So there's that. Just because we disagree with you guys, and just because we believe homosexuality is a sin and want to help people that are in the throngs of that sin or are struggling with that kind of a temptation, then that doesn't make us hateful. I mean, you just have to really crawl out on a limb. That doesn't make us hateful any more than it makes you guys hateful for thinking we're wrong, right? And for wanting to shut down our deconversion therapy sessions. Anyways, on to other things. One of the things that I wanted to talk about this evening was the kerfuffle over at Westminster Theological Seminary between them and Dr. Lane Tipton, who has since taken a position elsewhere. He was basically, I believe it was a forced resignation, and at one point Westminster was saying, we're excited because he's sought other opportunities elsewhere and we're supporting him. Then they released something like a month later saying, well, he's violated our standards and that's the reason he's left. So it's already kind of a shaky deal. This all stems from an issue that has been ongoing at Westminster, really revolving around the doctrine of God. And it has to do with Dr. K. Scott Oliphint's articulation of the doctrine of God in several of his works, but I believe the most lucid kind of elucidation that he gives, or elucidation, that's redundant. The most lucid explanation he gives of his theology proper is in, I believe it's let me see here. Go to Amazon. I want to get the title right. It's Philosophy in the Service of Theology, but there is an actual title to the book. Do we have it here? We're struggling to pick it up. Anyway, I think it's actually Reasons for God. I don't want to be too dogmatic about that, but I think it's Reasons for God, Philosophy in the Service of Theology. I know for sure that's the tagline of the book. That's the subheading. But I'm not sure, not 100% sure about the title. Anyways, how Dr. Oliphint has formulated his doctrine of God has been problematic. I remember even before coming to a real kind of understanding of theology proper and the doctrine of God, reading through his reasons for God, reading through that book. This is a book I'm acquainted with. It's a book I've read in its entirety and took notes, though it has been a few years perhaps. I remember even reading through it then. This is before I read All That Is in God. This is before I knew who James Dolezal was. This is before I even touched Thomas Aquinas. This is before all of that, okay? And I was reading through that, and I remember reading about basically reading his articulation of covenantal condescension, and how really our doctrine of covenantal condescension, which everyone would say is true, God condescended by way of covenant. His articulation of that doctrine is problematic for a number of reasons, but one reason that stuck out to me even then, and even more so now, is that God takes on covenantal attributes or covenantal properties, and he takes these properties upon himself whenever he comes into a covenant relation with creatures. In other words, when he covenantally condescends, he takes upon himself these properties. I believe one example he used, I think he also used the Incarnation as an example, but another example that he used was creation. When God, before God created, he was not creator. And so when God created, he took on the covenantal property of being creator. And you can check my math on that, but I think that's one of the examples he uses. And another example he uses and interacts with quite often is the doctrine of the Incarnation in that particular volume. One of the problems with that, and that's out of one side of his mouth. On the other side of his mouth, he's saying, these properties do not accrue to the divine essence. So these are properties that God takes on, but nevertheless, they're not properties that accrue to the divine essence. And okay, so you say, well, then who takes these properties on? If it's not the divine essence, then what is it? Well, he'd say, well, God takes them on. Well, so God and the divine essence, are those two different things? To separate the concept of God from the essence of God is to kind of reverse engineer a word concept fallacy, but it's also to imply that there's two entities there, that there's two essences there, right? There's God and then another essence, the divine essence, that the properties don't accrue to. The property, if the properties are taken on by God, then they have to have some sort of relationship to the divine essence, do they not? And as far as I could tell, there was no explanation as to how that was articulated. And so God moves from being not creator to being creator, and so on and so forth. Other things fall into place there. And that's an issue. That's an issue because what it signifies is that basically Oliphint has a doctrine of God that posits actuality, a kind of an admixture of actuality and potentiality in the divine essence. In other words, God is actual, he exists, right? He's in act, but he's not purely actual. There's some potential in God, right? That could be actualized later on. That is him becoming creator and so forth. So God is really, most basically, God is composed of two parts. There's a real distinction in God between God's actuality and God's potentiality. And not only that, but when he takes on properties, he's taking on parts. He's taking on things, and he's changing in relation to these things, rather than the things changing in relation to him. And so God undergoes some kind of a change. He undergoes some kind of a change. And I know Dr. Oliphint would say, no, God's immutable. He doesn't change. But then he'll say, but he does take on covenantal attributes. Well, you're blatantly contradicting yourself at that point. You're blatantly contradicting yourself at that point. Now, if he were to qualify it and say, God, in and of himself, God ad intra, right, is immutable. He doesn't change. God ad extra, as God appears to us, as God has revealed himself to us, appears to us to change. It's perspectival, right? God appears to us to change. God appears to us to take on covenantal attributes. But if I can remember correctly, and I think the problems still circulating around the volume really indicate the fact that he hasn't parsed that out, and he hasn't made that qualification, he hasn't made that distinction, not at least sufficiently so. You know, the other problem is with, you have others out there teaching along similar lines, even worse. I would say Dr. Frame. And I've interacted with Dr. Frame over Facebook. I have read his books, and not all of them, but I've read some of them. And I've skimmed through his doctrine of God, especially where he talks about the two existences of God. God has two existences. One existence, he doesn't change. In another existence, he does change. He becomes creator. He relates to his creation. He submits himself to time, so on and so forth. Right? So these are massive errors in the doctrine of God. And they're not errors that we should just pass off or ignore. They're very important. They're very important issues to discuss. They're very important issues to be corrected. So, anyways, guys, I just wanted to talk about a couple of those things, and hopefully we can get into some more discussion on divine simplicity, some more theology proper stuff, maybe talk about adoption and justification. I'd like to kind of get away from some of the Facebook drama and all that, so hopefully this will be an opportunity to do that. Anyways, guys, if you appreciated this, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, go ahead and give me a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments section. And God bless you guys. Have a wonderful evening.